I'm Greg Mclelland, and I'm the general manager of Madison Wall here in Canada. Madison Wall is a very exciting new company, brainchild of Brian Weiser in Portland, Oregon, and it is a daily newsletter that's published for companies around the world that have anything to do with media. So it looks at all the public companies, all their quarterly results, all the platforms, all the major advertisers, and it allows everyone in your organization to be able to digest that in a very unique format, which is usually 5 to 10,000 words a day. Brian Weiser, I've known for probably 15 years. He did all the research for Pivotal Research for many years. And then about 5 years ago, he went to work at WPP, largest agency in the world, doing all their research. He ran their research worldwide for about 3 years. And then 2 years ago, he started Madison Wall, and it was combining, obviously, Madison Street, Wall Street coming together. So the marketers and the finance people coming together in his brain. And so he allows you to look at all the financial pieces of the world from the media business and digest that with the actual advertising. Every given day, if you look at how much information is coming at all of us, whether you're a CRO or a sales executive or a financial person or a CFO, you're trying to get the information and being able to use it as a tool. What Madison Wall does is digests it all for you and allows you to read it in a very curated manner. My prior job, I was a CRO of Course Entertainment here in Canada, and I was Brian's first client, Course. And why we took it on was for 3 reasons. One, it gave the senior folks access to information in a very timely manner, and like I mentioned, easy to digest. But also, it allowed all our salespeople, everyone in the organization, to get that information. So if you were looking after a Procter & Gamble or a General Motors or one of the banks, you could see their results, and he would make it very easy for you to understand what's going on in their financials and what it means to you as someone trying to sell them something. There's very few people doing this inside of Canada. In fact, and that's one of the reasons why I think the interest has been so high, because we will look at BCE, Bell's, Quarterlies, and Rogers, and Chorus, Shopify, all the Canadian companies that, would merit being looked at. We actually do that work, and I think we're the only company doing it. So, and because we have a worldwide platform, and the way it's priced to go, it goes to everyone in a company, all of a sudden doing work in Canada becomes much more affordable. Like everything, it's moving extremely quickly. But I would say the biggest thing for CROs in the media business, from my perspective now, is finding new revenue streams. So at one time, your TV and radio made up 80, 90% of all your revenue, and you had to make sure you were maximizing that. That's now less than 30%. And it's falling away on a quarterly basis. So if you're going to be a successful CRO, especially in the media space, you have to find out what your advertisers need and how can you get new revenue streams, both from an advertising standpoint and from a services standpoint. For years, you had, if you just look at what was going on in primetime television in Canada, it made up 70, 80% of the schedule. And that made up 70, 80% of the revenue by definition. Now you look at that, it's a lot less. And so now all of a sudden you're competing with the YouTubes, and, everyone used to say, oh, cat videos aren't that important. Well, they're now bringing in more money than cat videos as a concept of YouTube, bringing in more money than all of television in Canada. We have to move fast as an industry. I'm still in the media industry, and those big companies have to move fast. And there's a couple of things. I think the services angle and new revenue streams are absolutely where people have to focus. So just one small example would be if you look at experiential opportunities for companies. Rogers is doing an unbelievable job in my mind with what they're doing with the Blue Jays. But if you look at all the different great brands that are out there in this country today, like pick radio stations, Q107, pick a great TV network, Food Network. How can you experience those as Canadians today? It's usually only by listening or watching. And they, as companies, have a huge opportunity in front of them to take those brands and expand them to allow people to experience them in different ways. And I'm convinced to make a lot of money doing it. Well, the Canadian media landscape it's a couple of things. One, we have, I think, the unique luxury and perspective of seeing what's going on in the U.S. ahead of time. So because we have a simulcast situation here and we see what's going on in the U.S., as Canadians, we can, one, leverage what's going on there, but we also have our own network, so we can do a lot of things uniquely here in Canada that doesn't cost nearly as much money. And we do a lot more what I call test and learn in Canada. I don't think we've been doing enough of that, but we should be doing more of that. For example, these are just examples, but why only 30-minute and 1-hour TV shows? If you look at the average person and how they consume content today in Canada, I would say less than 5% of it is consumed in a 30-minute or 1 hour section. So why you have these massive networks that reach 98% of Canadians on a monthly basis? Why aren't you trying different ways to get to Canadians the way they want to see content? The sort of challenges that stood before these broadcasters years ago have almost all fallen away. And now, if you look in Canada, also, we have what I would call as a great star system creator in the networks because of the way it works in Canada. You need independent producers, not like the same in the US. So if you look at the Food Networks and HGTVs and histories and, the list goes on and on and on. In Canada, we have very big hosts. The Baumlers is a good example. Scott McGilvery, Sarah Richardson, Mark McEwen, all these big stars that we could be leveraging and doing all sorts of great content. And they're doing it on their own without the networks. So, I think there's some really big opportunities there if people just sort of focus. I spent a lot of my last 10 years trying to do this inside of Chorus Entertainment, obviously trying to find new revenue streams. And I'll tell you, it's very challenging for a couple of reasons. One, it has to be big enough. The opportunity has to be big enough to get the CEO's attention and the board's attention to direct funds to that opportunity. But it can't be too big that it brings inherent risks that's going to hurt the company. So you're all of a sudden in a very interesting conundrum of trying to find an opportunity big enough that the company says, oh, that's worth trying, versus, oh my God, if this doesn't work, it could really jeopardize the health of the company. And a good example would be, what I was talking about, experiential ideas inside of a company, because a lot of times people will say, well, that's too big or that's too small. But the one I always go to as an example that I think is awesome is Lego. I think Lego has done a tremendous job. If you can imagine being in those rooms as a Lego employee, looking at Lego and saying, how the hell can we make this little plastic thing more appealing to more people? And then coming up with the concept of building the Titanic or the Eiffel Tower and charging $1,000 for that puzzle, and it sells out. Great opportunity. There's I think an unbelievable example of creativity, taking something that has been used for 100 years and changing it overnight and creating great revenue streams. So sometimes I think it's right in front of us, but it takes a lot of hard work and it takes a tremendous amount of energy. I think from a Canadian perspective, we have lots of opportunity to take our platforms or build technologies that go outside the country. And Shopify, I think, is a perfect example of not, you can't obviously make 5 or 10 Shopifys in a lifetime, but I do think there's big opportunities for us as an industry to take our platforms and take them outside the country. I think what sometimes holds us back, especially from the media perspective, is we have this love affair with it might be changing now, but bear with me here. We have this love affair with Americans and American thought process. And so all of a sudden, if I was doing something and I told the Canadian industry, it'd be one thing. If an American says the same thing, it's, oh my God, we have to buy that tomorrow, which is somewhat frustrating. But I've seen it over and over again. So, I think a lot of people outside of Canada are much better at marketing their services and products than Canadians. We tend to be too humble. We tend to want to make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted before we start selling, a solution. And I think we could learn something from our partners south of the border on how fast they move. And sometimes, don't let great be the enemy of good.